before. As a matter of fact, you may never have heard my voice before, but you got to hear this today. I need you to stay with me. We got a lot to cover. Before we get out of that, if you've never been here before, great. I hope you enjoy what you see, and we will get your comments at the end. I do need you to listen to the end because there's a lot we need to cover in a short period of time.
Absorbing damage is the name of your game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, or strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so today we're going to be having some fun. We're going to be talking about fun, and we're going to be talking about the panoply of things that disguise themselves as fun that we've let slip into our culture that I think might be a problem. This is a Game Master's rant. So I've been a Game Master for 50 years, and I've sat at a lot of tables and had a lot of different people sitting there with me. And today we're going to talk about the things that are passing for fun that are really problematic and why we need to reconsider what we think of as fun. And at the end, I'm going to come back to bring this all back around to what fun really should be and could be and can be, and in my belief, needs to be for our culture to fix itself. First of all, we have so many different sources for entertainment today that we have absolute sensory overload. If you want something shocking, there's shock shows. If there's something that is gory that you want to see, you can take that in. If there's something that is culturally unacceptable, there's a boundary and a barrier for all of that. It's literally a wild, wild west when it comes to entertainment processes, and whether that be vicarious one-way visuals where you're watching somebody else do something, or if it's social interaction of some sort, this is gotten to the point where it's very hard for someone to truly understand and appreciate the nuances of what fun is. And so I might be talking to you from the standpoint of thinking I'm from the moon, that everything is fine and you're enjoying your life, and that's great. But if you listen to some of the things that we're going to be talking about, we have actually 9 specific things that I believe are dangerous that we've let into our forms of entertainment today. And I think you'll see I'm not being as specific as you think, but I'm also not being as generic as you might like. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is diversion. If you have a cell phone on your game, if you have a game on your cell phone that you play more than 3 or 4 minutes a day, that's diversionary entertainment. And diversion, while it may feel pleasant because you're kicking off the dopamine in your brain and you're getting the synapses firing, and perhaps the images are pleasant or the story is compelling, all of these portions do not actually make for something that is enjoyable. Instead, it is a diversion. And that term literally means what it sounds like. It diverts you. It gets you away from something else. Now, when we have a lot of things in our lives that are unpleasant, having just a little bit of a prurient interest tickled us in certain points during the day can certainly divert us from the difficulties of our lives, but it doesn't improve them in any fashion. And when we're talking about what I consider to be true joy, you derive that from places in your life where you have something that is connective and embracing. And we'll get more into that as we go along. But the first thing we're talking about is, do not think of diversion as something that is necessarily fun. It doesn't have to be. It can be somewhat drudgery. I used to have a video game that had me doing all these punching and moving around of objects on the screen, and it didn't change my life in any way. As a matter of fact, it burned up what little free time I had in between. And I have a great friend who always reminds me that he's one of the few people in the world that actually won at Candy Crush. And of course, when you ask him, what did you do to win at Candy Crush? He said, nah, I quit playing. And that's really the point. The diversion becomes itself a burden, especially if it has certain rewards at certain times. It's the equivalent, if you will, of the push button, get bacon concept, that somehow you're rewarding yourself for not following the course you were originally intended on, and that is by nature a diversion. So diversion doesn't generate happiness, and it certainly isn't, by definition, fun. Now, this is one of my favorite words in the entire world. It's Melanie's word, and it has... It's very difficult to come up with a term in the English language that covers it. As a matter of fact, the closest we come is actually a word we've appropriated from German, which is Schadenfreude. And Schadenfreude is the same as Banbanam. It's the concept that you are deriving joy by watching the plight of others. When somebody else gets in trouble and you didn't, there's a bit of release, a little bit of joy in that. And this is not, again, not true joy. It's a falsehood. It's based on the premise of somebody else having a bad day. And really, we shouldn't have any situation where we wish a bad day on anybody. And this concept of Banbanam, although it is a dynamic in everyday occurrences, it shouldn't be that which we actually derive fun from, because somebody's having to have a bad day for it to even occur. Now, this one, sarcasm, has been with us as long as I've been alive. I can recall there were radical points in time where, for example, television programming changed from laughing at circumstance and changing that to laughing at people. And this sarcasm became really prolific in the 70s, and it went on through 80s, 90s, and even in modern day, with a considerable amount of the entertainment material that's provided by comedians or movies that put us in a situation where we get to hear this snarkiness, this sarcasm drip from someone's lips. And more often than not, it's when something is stated that might have been an absolute truism by itself, but the way in which it is delivered gives it more of an edge and leads to a little bit of a later step, but does refer to the idea that somehow we're taking pleasure from somebody else's wit. We're allowing them even to be somewhat bully-ish and making comments about others, and then we are mocking and laughing with that. And there's more to it than that, but the idea that we've allowed sarcasm to overcome our ability to communicate directly and honestly with each other has become problematic. Now, this is the one that sarcasm leads to, and that is the concept of discomfort. In the 60s and 70s, there were comedians and humorists that were stepping to the fore that were masters of putting you as an audience member in an uncomfortable position. Whether their humor was edgy and dangerous and borderline racist or abusive in some fashion, the idea that we somehow take pleasure from the discomfort is, I guess, akin to the idea of the slasher film, the jump at you horror films, and those kind of films where we titillate, we tickle our experiences, and we get from it the dopamine effect, the serotonin effects that we're looking for, and so therefore we think of that as being enjoyable when it's really a reflection of the discomfort we're feeling. I remember reading someplace that we laugh for one of three reasons. One is irony, and another is discomfort, and of course I don't remember the third, which is itself the joke. But this idea that we're taking and creating places where there is any discomfort at the table can be problematic. Now, yes, as a game master and a storyteller, I'm talking about the things that we find fun in a group play environment, but this actually applies even into situations like being in a social scene or whatever. We can get uncomfortable and feel this discomfort. We laugh at it. We actually have developed means of covering up our lack of enjoyment by laughing at things that are uncomfortable simply because we don't know any other way to handle it. The issue here is that discomfort really can't lead to joy in any circumstance because there's not, it's an empty sort of entertainment. And now, competition. As a games player, you would think that I also would be very big on this concept of competition. But in this case, I'm referring to the competition that we build with those that are closest to us in order to develop the idea of one-upmanship. We're looking for that edge that's going to put us, one step ahead of our competition. And this is a kind of an unhealthy and untenable position because in any condition where you're playing a game where there is competition that gets to the point of adversarial experiences, you're not truly competing. You're now moving into fundamentally the front edge of warfare, or the emotions that we're feeling are not joy, but they are feelings of rage and anger when the situation doesn't go our way or we have been thwarted in some fashion. And so one of the big benefits of the European invasion of the board games environment in the 80s, 90s, and so on was the fact that so many of those games were competition that wasn't truly competition. It was sometimes collaborative. As a matter of fact, there was a word that was created in that period that I've seen in a few magazines but haven't seen much since then, and that's the concept of co-opetition. The idea that, yes, we're both working towards winning the game, we're both building towards some objective, but at the same time we're recognizing that the very people that we're working with are themselves attempting to achieve the same goals we have, and so therefore we have put ourselves in a position where a form of competition is there. But what I'm speaking of is the adversarial nature. If you look at sporting events and the way players and the fans act after their team has either lost or won a competition, and they rip down goalposts and tear up the city, light things on fire, this level of pent-up energy that is coming from competition is not healthy and isn't really an enjoyable way of feeling the competition that we could, in theory, at least in other situations, derive it. Of course, when you are competitive and you are particularly good at the game at which you play, you can develop an air of superiority. And I've noted this happening even in role-playing games. It's not necessarily that you are superior to the game master, you're not necessarily superior to other players, but you are competent enough at the game itself that you are no longer seeing the intricacies of the role play, and instead you're only seeing how your cleverness can get you an edge over others. And this need for superiority quite often overcolors things. And so for example, one game that does this a lot is the game of Scrabble. And I love Scrabble, don't get me wrong, and I happen to be fairly competent at it. But even with that, when you're playing with somebody who has a game on lock, so to speak, and they've got every possible angle covered, there's no joy in it. All of the energy that would have been collectively shared is instead being drawn into one person because of their ability, or I would say even their disability because of it. Because as you play a game and are taking on this superior nature, you're only setting up almost the converse of that, which is the desire for Banbanam. They need to take someone down or to feel the release when they has led to this push me pull you of aggression that has overtaken the true joy that you might find in a role-playing game or even a board game. Now all of this leads to anarchy and chaos, yes, but I'm referring here in this particular case to those game methodologies that themselves foment disunity, distrust, and fundamentally drive players away from one another instead of towards each other. I'm I get in trouble for this particular point because I'm drawing a rather stark opinion on it. But there is the card game, which you probably heard of and probably have had at your table, Cards Against Humanity. And to me, their tagline says it all. It is the game for horrible people. That is their tagline, not something I'm putting on them. But this concept that you are going to be playing with other people and literally driving them into this concept of chaos and anarchy, frustration, and anger is the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing in a game environment. We're supposed to be getting something from the table and from the interaction. And I think this is really kind of important to catch. When we play games with one another, if we are playing those games to reach any of these other objectives, we're missing the point. We're missing a great positive response from it. I'm reminded of the movie Monsters Incorporated, wherein it was discovered that the interaction between the monsters and the children, their targets in the movie, was to instill a response and invoke a condition on the other person's heart. And in the case of monsters, of course, the monsters are scary. So the idea is that you scare children to drive energy and whatever. And as our culture has moved more and more into those areas, the amount of impact that provides became less and less for the monsters. And so eventually they were completely surprised and in awe when they discovered that the joy, the laughter aspect, the unmitigated pleasure that can come from making children happy and making others happy is itself a release. And it is utilizing the same mechanisms, but anarchy and chaos lead to disruption and uncomfortableness for the players. This next one is a little bit strong, but the idea of subjugation is the idea that one person can put his will over on another. And while there are games that are competitive enough to lead to strong feelings, the concept that one player should feel like they can dictate to others what actions they will take is problematic, and really is the pinnacle, if you will, of the opposite direction of what our culture wants. We need to, instead of finding ways to gain superiority and control over others, and instead to find ways for us to work together. So now we come to my final conclusion. All right, so now we're going to talk for a few seconds here at the end of all of this. Before that, I'm going to stretch. I got to get some of this energy out of me because the conversation has been a little stressful for me, covering these rather darker subjects and perhaps not leaving room for you guys to be happy with me. But here we go. What we need in life is to find ways to play games and have fun. And we should therefore play games for the fun of it. So let me describe fun. And this is, I'm going to be asking immediately afterwards for your opinions, so you can start typing now. I'd love to get from you your responses on what you think fun is. But to me, a fun environment is when there is some elevation of one or more of the people that are at the table, maybe all of them, through the interaction and the connection and the validation and acceptance that we feel when we play. These games don't necessarily have to be one size fits all. We don't have to have it. I mean, one of the biggest things I've noticed recently is there are a lot of games that focus their very structure on asymmetrical nature, the idea that one side has a way of winning that's different from the other, and therefore they're not trying for the same thing. This is, I believe, a recent attempt to try to overcome one or more of the challenges that I put before this, and arguably many of them try to cover two or three of them. Pardon me. But the point here is that if we can get to the point where we're playing the game for the sheer enjoyment, the spectacle of it, the engagement of it, the interest in the story behind it, the game can be enjoyable for everyone. It isn't necessarily going to be one side. It's not that we always win. It's not that we have to share the victory. As a matter of fact, it's often great fun to play a game with the intent of observing what would happen if we lose in order to understand and experience how other people play. But the overall content should be of a positive, ultimate nature, should have progression and advancement implicit in its design, and it should have a recognition and acceptance of that superiority. Man, that's a word for me. Superiority when it comes. So the idea is that we need to have games that we play that are by nature uplifting and enjoyable and silly, perhaps. But the idea is we want to bury all these other concepts that we have let insinuate themselves into our playtime and get to the point where we are actually enjoying being together and experiencing the game. So I'm going to leave the question to you here at the end. What things do you find enjoyable in the games that you play? What games in particular do you find fulfill these tasks? And I'd like to maybe even build possibly a top 10 list of games that you guys recommend, and we can look into the possibility of playing those either in advance and reviewing them, or even playing them together live and seeing how that goes. But I did want to make sure you knew that there is a way to have fun in this country. There is a way to overcome all of the rants that I've discussed, and that is to play a game and enjoy the company of those that are there. I want to thank you for being here tonight, and if you haven't yet, press all the buttons down below to let the algorithm know that you're part of our audience, and go play.